Trauma Uncensored.
Trauma Uncensored.
Trauma Uncensored.
Welcome everyone to the Trauma Uncensored podcast. My name is Andres Gamboa and your host is here with me, Brooke Scherer. Welcome to the show. If this is your first episode, it's because it's the first episode and you would have noticed that this is the oldest one we have. We'll pin this one as well. But everything that we're going to talk about on this podcast is going to hinge on the story that we're going to go over today. It is something that if you want more details about something we didn't cover in this story, you can most certainly Google it and you will find it in the news all over the place. So thank you for being here. On this show, we are going to be healing out loud, and we are not experts, right away, disclaimer, in any sort of psychology. We did not go to school for psychology or counseling or therapy. We are just two people who believe that sharing trauma and the strategies that we took to grow from it is going to be as important as learning and understanding how the brain works from a doctor. Healing out loud, sharing each other's trauma is a cause that's worth living. That is what makes us human, and it's what can connect us. At least that's what we believe here on the show. Brooke, I'll have you introduce yourself really quick, and then we can kind of talk about what this podcast is going to be about, and then we'll jump into the story if that's cool.
Yep, absolutely. Hey everyone, my name is Brooke. Our family currently live in the Nashville area, Nashville, Tennessee. We're from Indianapolis, lived in Tampa for a long time. I was a professor there, and through this journey, we finally have found home in Brentwood, Tennessee. Love it very much. I have been very blessed to meet Andreas through a mutual friend, and here we are, creating a platform, and hopefully we're going to create some change, some dialogue, some change, some community, some a safe space for people to understand that life is going to be life, and life is going to happen. It doesn't matter who you are, what you do, where you are in your life. But we're here to help others, walk their own path through whatever hardship they may be going, and really to understand that nobody is alone. It may feel like it, but you're not alone.
That's right. I love it. That quote, everybody's been through the hardest thing they've ever been through. And so if that's you, this is a place where we can heal. But part of the healing is being able to tell stories that are difficult to tell and revisiting memories that are difficult to revisit, because that is the best way to deal with them, is just straight on and head on. And it's important to have support. And so if you're listening to this and you're someone who needs help, of course, reach out to us. There is a hello at, traumauncensored.com, which is exciting. But if you are in need of help, there are different resources that we're going to post on every episode that you can go listen to as well. And some of which you're going to hear on the story that we're about to tell through Brooke's life, and maybe through things that I've also experienced. So without further ado, we can jump into what this podcast is going to cover exactly. A lot about trauma, a lot about distracted driving. It's a theme of this show that's going to kind of be recurring, because it's a lot where this is censored, but a lot about parenting and marriage, and being able to handle trauma through all of those aspects of someone's life. And so stick around for that. Today we're going to just cover probably the biggest turning point that has led to Brooke's life changing in perspective, and in is that fair to say that it changed the way that you were looking at your past and your future? I would just say that it changed everything about my life. I categorize my life honestly in two sections, and that's the section before September 15th, 2016, and then the section after. And I don't even know, section's not really a great word. Maybe, and chapter isn't strong enough. My first version of life, before that date, and now I'm living in the second version, or, I don't know, maybe we could even say, the years before that date was just existing. And now, even though it's been a hell of a road to get where I'm sitting at today, now I'm living and I'm thriving, and
I think there is a very distinct dichotomy between the 35 years I lived before September 15th, 2016, and the almost 9 years I've lived post.
Since. Yeah. Beautifully said. Beautifully
Yep.
said. All right. So let's just break it down. Let's just get right into it. What happened on September 15th, 2016?
Well, the Cliff Notes version, because if I don't do Cliff Notes right off the bat, it will just go on and on. But on September 15th, 2016, our family was involved in a very violent automobile crash that took the life of our 9-year-old son, Logan. The rest of the family, so my husband, Jordan, myself, and then our then 5-year-old daughter, Mallory, were all in the car. Simply put, it has been stated by forensics and people at the scene and everybody working on our case, none of us should have survived. So Jordan, myself, and Mallory, we all survived, and that is literally a miracle. But the fact of the matter is that Logan, at 9 years old, lost his life from something that was completely avoidable, could have absolutely been prevented. In fact, starting right off the bat, I want to change the vernacular that many people talk about when they reference our case, when they reference our story, and they call it an accident. And it was absolutely not an accident. An accident would have been something that could have been prevented, right? An accident could have, or is something that, doesn't fall at the hands of another human that was, doing something that is preventable. It's just, we were not in an accident. We were in a violent car crash caused by another human being that was doing a multitude of things that should not have been happening at the time.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly that. So that is a great Cliff Notes of the story. And let's get into these details about exactly what happened. And let's maybe do a quick recap also on the post of why this particular car crash dealing with distracted driving gained so much national and even international acclaim. Because there's someone right now, unfortunately, probably crashing their car because they're texting or they're being distracted that we'll never hear about. So
Right.
what exactly happened or what were the reasons that it made it so notorious?
So in 2017, cell phones, were a thing, not new to the scene, but nobody was talking about people using their phones while they were driving. Distracted driving was not a common term that was used. Very few people were using it. Everybody was doing it. My husband and I are the first people to tell you that before this, we were, avid cell phone users in the car. In fact, I bought my first cell phone in 2010, my first smartphone, in 2010, because I was a professor at the University of Tampa, and that was my first school year, and the emails alone, were just piling from day to day. And I bought it and I was like, I'll just do this sitting at a light. I'll just check them sitting at a light. But what happened was it became very commonplace. Oh, well, I'll just check it when I'm doing this. Oh, I'll just check it when I'm doing that. And so, there was nobody talking about it. Well, I shouldn't say nobody, because there were people talking about it, but it wasn't gaining any speed. So in 2016, the reason that our case was so phenomenal was because we had just come to a stop in traffic on I-75 in Florida, just around the Brooksville exit. So about, I think, an hour or so north of Tampa. And we were headed to Ocala. And we learned later that it was a 3.5 mile backup ahead. That's what we were stuck in because there was another crash. And moments after we stopped, we were slammed into the back by a man who was driving between 80 and 85 miles an hour, buried in his phone. He didn't see us. In fact, forensics has showed that right before the crash, the throttle in his car increased from 12 to 14%, which means he actually sped up as he drove into us. There was median on the left he could have pulled over. There was ample space. He had, I think, the length of a football field to be able to see us and stop, but he didn't. It was a clear day. It had rained just prior to, but there were no skid marks. There was nothing. He just plowed into the back of us. What makes this such a landmark case, however, is that over the past, it took 7 years, and in 2023, in April of 2023, the day just after our wedding anniversary, actually, which is April 23rd, we started the week-long trial against the man who killed our son. It would go on to convict him of vehicular homicide for Logan and 3 counts of severe bodily injury, reckless driving with severe bodily injury for the rest of us, because Jordan, myself, and Mallory were all very critically injured. In fact, I learned during the trial that I was slowly suffocating in my own blood because I had a punctured lung. We found during the trial that both Jordan and Mallory's injuries were a lot more severe than we had been led to believe for all those years.
Wow.
Yep. So he was convicted, and in the middle of June, the judge sentenced him to 30 years in prison. So what makes this whole situation, what makes our case groundbreaking, is that prior to this conviction and sentencing, nobody had been convicted of the homicide and sentenced to that many years in prison for the carnage that he caused on that day. And so it didn't just set a precedent, locally, regionally, but nationally, if not internationally, because there's been nothing out there. In fact, our trial, which started in the spring, or the process started, he was arrested in February of 2018, which actually Jordan and I were on our way to Tallahassee to represent Living for Logan, which was our nonprofit at the time. We were headed to Tallahassee to speak in front of legislation to try and get the first distracted driving bill passed through. So talk about serendipitous timing, right? And I don't believe in coincidences, so I look at that as, we call them Logan nods. It was a Logan nod that we had just happened to be headed there when we got the phone call from the arresting officer. She had been on the scene. We had worked with her the day of and since, and she had called while we were sitting there and said, "We just picked him up. His name is Gregory Andriotis. You'll hear me reference him mostly as Andriotis, but they had just picked him up and taken him to jail." And it would be from 2018 to 2023 that we would be in this legal process. And the interesting part is that because distracted driving was not on the map, literally on the map at the time that all of this legal stuff began, I got stalled by COVID and it would push through and push through. Even the judge said at sentencing that it is because of that time space. Now, it was hell, I'm going to tell you, for us to live through that many years and to wait and wait and worry. And it was pushed back, and it was supposed to go to trial, and then it didn't go to trial. And that caused a lot of dysregulation for me and, all sorts of things. But at the end of the day, it panned out to where distracted driving, Jordan and I had done a lot of work with our nonprofit during that time. There are other nonprofits out there that were bringing distracted driving, to the forefront. had it not been for that time span, because that's a hell of a lot of time to sit and wait for a trial, a hell of a lot of time and trauma and energy and all things you can and cannot even imagine people would go through, emotionally, physically, all of that. But it was in that time that distracted driving came to the forefront enough that we were able to set a precedent. But because it was so long, or part of the reason it was so long was because the judge didn't have any case prior to this one to reference.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to just be like, boom, you were driving distracted. We're going to, take this straight to trial and convict you. There was so much back and forth, and God love the attorneys on our case. They fought and fought and fought to keep this going. And, speculation on my end anyway, again, speculation, things were talked about it in the courtroom, but it seemed as if everybody thought that this was just a fluff case. Like, why are we wasting taxpayers' time and money? And Andriotis, I don't think, took it seriously, because nobody else had been punished, and so why are we going through all of this, right?
Yeah,
but
his lawyers were probably like, they got nothing. We're just going to talk about this. We'll have a beer after or whatever.
I mean, yeah, I can't say. I'm projecting when I say that. Yeah, but, how can you when there's nothing to sit there and be like, oh, well, this person and this person and this person, did this and were convicted, so I'm going to be that way. It's
kind of like the first time anybody ever killed anybody with a car in general. Like, when cars were invented, that there was no law that said, what happens if you hit someone with your car,
right,
and they die,
right.
That first court case ever must have been a lot like this, where it was like, wait, shit.
Right. Or, well, I mean,
what do we do?
Think about Candy Lightner and Mad, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. I mean, her daughter was killed by a drunk driver, but, back in the 70s and early 80s, well, that's what people did. They drove home and they had a beer, right? And nobody was talking about it. It was socially acceptable. And that's, she has worked so hard, and of course people are still doing it, but people are also being punished for their and are receiving consequence for those actions. And we're just in the early seedling stage of using this to bring awareness and to bring change, but that's where it starts, and I feel very strongly that Jordan and I survived that crash, and Mallory for that matter, although she was young and, she's 13 now. So she's doing her own thing, but we're here because we're supposed to be. I fully believe that, if we all would have perished, if Andriotis would have perished, I mean, people are always like, well, I'll bet he survived, didn't they? In fact, I was having that conversation the other day. The lady I was talking to goes, well, I'll bet he survived, didn't he? And I said, yes, but I believe he was supposed to, because had we perished in that crash, he hit us. He hit us so hard that our car catapulted forward from 0 to 41 miles an hour in less than a tenth of a second. I'm going to repeat that and take out your cell phone, or if anybody's listening while you're not driving, of course, take out your cell phone, turn on your stopwatch, or that, the stopwatch feature, and try to start and stop as fast as you can and see if you can hit a tenth of a second. Because chances are you can't. We've tried and tried.
It's less than the time it takes you to blink.
Yeah. I mean, the car in front of us, I believe, went from 0 to 25 miles an hour. And it was so bad, it sandwiched 6 cars together. So 6 cars were sandwiched together in this crash.
Who had their brakes on? Not just were in park.
Right.
They had their brakes on because you were in traffic.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and
they were trying to not move specifically.
Exactly. Yeah. They were They were, I mean, Larry, one of our angels who was there on the scene and, you know, who got Logan out of the car, and, you know, he's very dear to us. But he got Logan out of the car. He tried to save him. He was sitting there eating his lunch on his way to work because we were all, you know, stuck in that backup. Yeah.
So let's walk through that. Let's get into some of these details so we can the whole uncensored part of this podcast is that we're not going to hold back details. And this is a good place to insert graphic warning. Yes. In case there's like some sort of, sensitivity to trauma when regarding any of this. So if this is a good time to either skip forward a few minutes or, just skip forward a few minutes. There'll be actually, let me put the timestamp too. We'll let you know when it's good to come back, and we'll put a chapter down below when it's like we've told the story. If enough of the story has been told for you to just skip forward and get the gist, that's also fine, because we want to make sure we have a trigger warning, I think is what that's called. So let's dive into the details of like what happened. What do you remember from your perspective? You were sitting there. Were you talking? Were you reading? Were you on your phone? Obviously, you're not driving. Jordan's driving, I'm assuming. Mm-hmm. You're just sitting there. The kids are in the back seat. Can you walk me through some of these details that you remember? Because you've told me the story before, but I actually have not asked you this in detail, specifically to wait for this recording. And all I know that you told me was that Jordan immediately passed out. Mm-hmm. You were the only one that was conscious. Mm-hmm. After the impact. So walk me through just before the impact to kind of, and we'll dig in, and I'll interject you or interrupt you as details get confused to me, in case it might be confusing to someone else.
It's fine. And well, I do want to put it out there that there are some very sensitive images or imagery and details about my children as well, which, you know, I don't wish any sort of death and grief of a child on anyone. And for those who may be listening, who have lost a child, first and foremost, I am so sorry, and know that I'm with you. For those of you who are sitting next to us and sitting next to me as I tell this story and envisioning the horrific trauma that is created from seeing your children in the way that I saw my children, I just want you to know that it is okay to skip forward. I've done a tremendous amount of work surrounding this. I've had to, so that way I can talk about it, that way I can live with it. But it is very sensitive material. So thank you for bringing that up, Andreas. Yeah, so, we were headed north on I-75, right around the Brooksville exit, on September 15th, 2016. And we saw just brake lights, nothing but brake lights all the way as far as we could see. And I remember as Jordan was pulling to a stop, I had actually pulled up. Yeah, and yes, Jordan was driving. I was in the passenger seat. Mallory's behind me, and then Logan is behind Jordan. And as we're pulling up to that stop, I pull up GPS on Google, and I see that there's a wreck 3 miles ahead. And I don't even think I finished that sentence. You know, there's a wreck 3 miles ahead. And then all of a sudden it just went black. What's interesting is we all blacked out. Of course, Logan, he perished on impact. We all black out, but in the work that I've done, I almost remember hearing the crunch. But the first thing I remember after I woke up, and I don't know how long I was out, could have been seconds, but I don't think it was very long, due to the 911 call that I placed and the 911 calls that were coming in and everything. When I woke up, I smelled burning. That's a first, like I can still smell it. I think it was like my arm was burnt. I wondered if it was the airbags that had deployed. The arm hair was singed off of my arm. So who knows what it was. But when I woke up, I immediately started scanning the car. I first looked at Jordan, who was slumped over the steering wheel. There was this very long piece of metal that was sitting on that center console between us. And I remember noticing that and thinking to myself, wow, that could have been really bad. But I looked at him, and he's slumped over, and I'm screaming his name. I'm just screaming. And I remember thinking, after I looked at him, for some reason, I scanned to the back, and I saw Logan slumped over. And, in the minutes before the crash, him and Mallory had been laughing and joking, and they had been leaning over. So Mallory's in her car, or in her booster seat, and Logan was big enough that he was just sitting in the back seat, but they had been leaning over, and they just found it really funny to just peck themselves or peck each other on the lips. And so they'd lean over to each other, and they were just like pecking each other, and then they would separate, and they would just laugh. They were just laughing. So I don't know at what part, if he was, if they were over, next to each other, if he was like leaned over next to her. But when I saw him, he was actually slumped over in that direction. And, I was yelling at him, and then I turned around and looked at Mallory, and she actually had been pushed up right behind my seat. She was just looking around, she was just inches from the back of my seat, and nobody was responsive. Nobody was talking. I'm flipping the fuck out. And Mallory starts screaming, and she starts screaming, "Owie." And I was like, okay, well, it was super difficult. I didn't know what to do for her, but okay, she's screaming. Logan's unresponsive. And I look back at Jordan, and Jordan's foaming at the mouth, and I'm screaming at him. And I remember thinking to myself, he can't die too. I can't lose my husband too. I think somewhere innately I knew Logan was dead. He had blood coming out of his nose. He was completely unresponsive, not moving at all, just like Jordan. The kicker of the whole situation, and I testified to this in trial, is that I had my cell phone in my lap. And this was very important when it comes to the unfolding of the story, because as I would get out of the car and look around, things had flown out, like Logan's glasses had flown out of the window, out of his window. They were on the side of the road. There was a hairband that had been underneath the radio. There's a little slit console thing under the radio that I had a hairband and some ginger chews in. They were in the corner of the window up by Jordan. Things had flown out of the car, around the car, but my cell phone was in my lap. And because I had been holding on to it when we got hit. And so that's going to play a very important part, and did play a very important part as we told the story in court. But I remember grabbing it, I remember getting out of the car. So the cell phone's there, but I get out of the car, and I remember there's glass everywhere, and I didn't have my shoes on. I'd had them off in the car, but I get out and I start screaming. I start screaming for help. There was a semi driver next to us. And I remember he's staring at me. He's in shock. I'm screaming at him for help. I'm screaming around. I feel like nobody's moving. So I get in and I retrieve my phone and I call 911. In the process, I'm on the phone with 911, and Larry comes up and he gets Logan out of the car and, very carefully got him out of the car.
And Larry's in one of the cars that was hit?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yep. Larry was midway through the 6 of the cars. So he was basically the center car, if you will, in between the 6. So he gets out and he is, gets Logan out of the car. And I remember him and this nurse. We followed, the nurse and I had stayed in contact for a hot minute, and then, we haven't spoken in a long time, but he gingerly pulls Logan out of the car and puts him in the grass. And meanwhile, I'm standing there next to Mallory, and she's just screaming, owie. That's the only word coming out of her mouth is owie, owie. These two wonderful humans pull Mallory out of the car. And what I see of my child was horrific. Her right leg, which saved her life, actually, because she was pinned up against me. The car did what it was supposed to, and it pushed the seats forward, and it pinned her in. So at the end of the day, Logan flew about the cabin because he was free. He wasn't pushed up and into the back, of Jordan like Mallory was. Plus, Mallory was in a booster seat. So all things happened that were supposed to happen to save people's lives. However, Logan, because he was, just seat belted, and because of the velocity of this, impact, was thrown about the cabin. So he died on impact, which for me is a blessing. I know he didn't suffer. The autopsy report showed he didn't suffer, although the carnage of the situation literally tore his insides to shreds. It broke his neck. So, literally, in the snap of a finger. So as a mother, I find comfort. Obviously, I think it goes without saying that I'm not going to sit here and say, well, I wish my son wasn't, I'm glad my son's dead, because that's not it at all. But I find comfort in knowing that he didn't suffer. I find comfort in knowing that he literally didn't know what hit him. But Mallory, on the other hand, they pull her out, and her right leg had been pinned against my seat. And as they pull her out, it literally was turned. Her leg at the knee was turned. And it's not supposed to do that, right? It's not, it's turned outward. And, she's screaming, and these wonderful people pull her out of the car and put her in the grass as well, but knew enough to put her far away from Logan that she had no idea he was next to her.
So let me pause you there. So it was obvious that Logan was not alive.
Well, so the nurse that I speak of ran back to get her paddles. And I'm standing there on the phone with 911. I'm watching them work on Logan. As a mother, and intuitively, I knew he was dead, but you don't want to hear that at all, right?
Right. But I guess I'm saying more like the fact that they knew to keep Mallory away from Logan, there was enough of like, you were aware, they were aware, this is probably not a good thing.
Logan was blue. He was laying there completely blue. As they were trying to give him CPR, his body just shook like Jell-O in a very unnatural way. Like I said, there was blood coming out of his mouth. There was blood coming out of his nose. But, so gratefully to all of the people who were on the scene, they tried. They did everything they could until the paramedics got there, and the paramedics did everything they could. And, I believe I was still on the phone with 911 when a young man walked up to me and said, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do. And I just remember, it's on the 911 call, just saying, what am I going to do without my son? I can't live without my son. Yeah, it's pretty heavy. And I think it was about that time. So interestingly, my body was completely broken. Like, my ribs were broken. I had a punctured lung from broken ribs. Of course, I felt none of it. Yeah. But I think it's interesting to me because I didn't just shut down in that moment. I knew my son was gone, but I also knew my husband was still there. And even though I knew Mallory was alive and injured, I at least knew she was alive. So I would direct all of my attention toward Jordan. They wouldn't let me. They kept pushing me back. They wouldn't let me see him, though. They wouldn't tell me what was going on. Where the cell phone thing, though, comes really in handy, the fact that I could retrieve mine so well. So I get out of the car, and of course, 6 cars are shoved together. So I can't walk in front of my car to go around to see Jordan. I have to walk behind Andriotis's car to get around, which means I have to walk past Andriotis. And I shit you not, the first thing I remember thinking as I looked into his car, as I'm walking across, he's sitting there. I mean, smashed into smashed into the front of, his driving console. He's like all the way up there. I'm thinking, how is this guy still alive, for one?
Yeah, that's shocking.
It is shocking. And I'm thinking, how's he alive? But he's doing this. He's on his phone. And I'm like, wait a minute. As time would move on, the first thing I thought to myself was, I'll bet he was on his fucking phone. And as time would go on and I'd start to put pieces together, like, well, all this stuff in our car was thrown all over the place, but I was able to get into my car and grab my phone that was sitting on my seat and call 911. Well, I had my phone in my hand at the time of the crash. So I start putting these puzzle pieces together, and it starts to become this conversation of, what was he doing? And he knew enough at the time to tell the officers on the scene, I wasn't drinking, I was on my phone, which is what he told officers. So, all of that would unfold, and all of that will unfold as we continue through this journey. But, I remember thinking that, but as I walk around, I see Jordan, he's still slumped over the steering wheel. He's unresponsive. And basically by this point, the EMTs are, getting me away from the scene. They don't want me seeing Mallory. They don't want me seeing Logan. They take me back around. So I have to walk back around, and I'm sitting there on, the side of this fire truck. And, I tell people my adrenaline, my fight or flight was so strong. They put a needle in my hand for an IV. I swear to you, the needle was like this long. And I'm watching it, and I can't feel a damn thing. I can't feel anything. And I knew enough then that I was like, man, I am running on adrenaline right now. And I wouldn't feel any of it until we get to the hospital and I hear Jordan's voice for the first time. And it was in that moment. I was sitting in a gurney in the hall. I remember hearing people going, the driver's sitting right behind you. And I'm like, why? Why do you have him sitting right behind me? We're right there together. But then they wheeled Jordan in front of me, and I hear his voice, and I know he's alive. And it was in that moment my whole body just released everything. And it just whoosh, all of the adrenaline just like flushed. And the pain was immeasurable. It was insane. But anyway, that all to say that the needle that was like, the size of Texas that went into my hand, and I didn't feel, but I remember sitting there, I would sit there on the steps of the fire truck and watch all of this happen and, unfold in front of me. And I can't do a damn thing because they wouldn't let me near. I don't know if my husband's alive. I don't know the status of my daughter. They airlift Jordan and, Mallory to the hospital, but they deemed that my injuries, mind you, I'm, slowly suffocating in my own blood. They didn't think my injuries were enough. I kept telling them, something's not right on the left side. I'm having a hard time breathing. And they're like, no, you're just in shock. They put me in an ambulance for, wow. It's an almost hour drive. Like, talk about the most ridiculous form of transportation to get to the hospital. But the one thing that sticks with me, and I tell people, you want to get in your car and you want to pick up your phone, that's fine. It's not really fine, but fine, you do your thing. I'm going to tell you, the last image I have of my 9-year-old son is him covered under a yellow tarp. We're driving south. I'm looking out of the back of the ambulance, and he is covered in a yellow tarp that gets smaller and smaller and smaller until I can no longer see him. That is the last image. I mean, I saw my child laying on the side of the road with blood coming out of his nose, coming out of his mouth. I see him completely blue. I see his body shaking like jelly. I'm told he's dead. They moved me around. I'm not allowed to see him anymore. But the last image of my child, my firstborn, is under a yellow tarp because he's dead. That is, of all the images that I take from that day, that is probably the most powerful, because that's the last time, that's the last thing. I mean, now here's the thing. The work that I've done over the past 9 years has allowed me to focus on the last moments that I choose to see, being of him and Mallory laughing in the back seat and giggling and having fun, and Logan telling Mallory of the story of when we took him, Jordan and I took him to New York City that March, and we took him to the best Italian restaurant that he had ever been to, and he wanted to take Mallory there. And I mean, you know, fun fact, we're headed to New York City for Logan's 18th birthday, and we're gonna see if we can't find that Italian restaurant and, you know, take her to all the places we took him. But that's one of the last things he said he was talking about before he passed away. And so those are the memories that I choose to believe, or that I choose to remember, not that yellow tarp. But that yellow tarp is very symbolic for a lot of reasons, because that yellow tarp is literally the last image I saw due to the death created by avoidable carnage. This was not an accident. And to further that, people say he died by texting and driving. Logan died because of a guy who was texting and driving. No. Let's talk about how texting was actually the last thing he was doing. He was doing a multitude of things on his phone, Andriotis, when he hit us, that prevented him from seeing the thousands of cars that were stopped in front of him and the brake lights that were in front of him. This was not a texting and driving case. There's so many other things possible to be doing on your phone while you are driving. And of course, we could start to talk about the other distractions in your car that we need to be cognizant of too. But my message here today is distracted driving does not equal texting and driving. Distracted driving is a whole host of things that take your eyes and attention off of the road. Logan under that yellow tarp was avoidable and was not caused by texting and driving. So that's kind of where our story is going to go.
Yeah, I mean, that's why this episode is about the crash specifically. I have some follow-up questions for you, and then we can share. I know you have some stats that we need to share as well that we have. Actually, could you share those now, and then I'll ask you some questions about this?
Yep. So NHTSA, which is the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, and we've worked with them through them. Yes, I'm pausing.
Pause that really quick. This would be welcome back for those of you who skipped the detailed story. We're about to share some statistics about distracted driving. Yes, go on. Sorry,
yes,
just to
totally
welcome back the folks that skipped ahead.
So NHTSA, which is the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, we worked with them a lot when we were running our nonprofit, Living for Logan. We have, been in conferencing with them, all sorts of things. But they state that in 2023, 3,275 lives were taken by distracted driving. That equates to about 9 lives a day. Now, people are going to hear that and they're going to say, well, that's, I mean, really not a lot. That's 3,300 people. But here's the deal. Those are cases that are proven to be caused by distracted driving. The numbers aren't simply at 9 a day or 3,300 a year. The thing is that because we don't have the appropriate tactics and laws in place to be able to, seize a phone and put it through forensics, after a crash, there's no way to actually prove unless you're looking at something, that is a more severe case. So when we say 3,300 people, let's not pigeonhole that into that statistic. We have to think much broader. We have to understand that that's just what can be proven.
Yeah. That's also fatalities. That's not right. That's not like the number of people who
that is correct.
were in a car accident, but you broke my leg or you left me paralyzed or any other. That's just fatalities. So there's a whole other gamut of you didn't kill someone, right? But you did change their life forever because now they can't, whatever.
Absolutely.
Whatever injury could be permanent. And even if it's not, you injured someone for 2 years, it changes their entire, I rolled my ankle 2 months ago playing soccer and I couldn't walk my daughter around while I was holding her to put her to sleep, which was a real bummer and inconvenience. That's just an ankle, let alone, the damage you could have caused to someone, if you broke their leg or
Absolutely.
any other. So that is
a great point.
And the fatalities that can be proven.
Right.
So that number has to be much, much, much larger. And by the way, if you want to see where we're citing these sources and these statistics, we're going to put the link below in the show notes. So you can scroll up, click on that. You can see where we're getting all this information from too, because I hate being one of those podcasts that just starts spewing numbers about things and then there's nothing to back it up. So go check that out if you're interested or, questioning some of these stats. Please feel free to go check that out. Question for you then.
Yes.
on this. Why and I know the answer, but for people listening, so why were you able to take forensics of his phone and stuff? And I know this is going to be more of a teaser into a whole different episode that we do have planned, specifically talking about the trial and how it moved forward the day after, and not just the day after, but the years later. But just to kind of help people understand in this particular case, why can't you just do forensics on a phone, and why were you guys able to?
So, it's been a very interesting journey that has been sprinkled with those Logan winks all along. I mean, over the past 9 years, and will continue to be, because just because I'm sitting here today, almost 9 years later, talking to you, it doesn't mean that this isn't going to be a lifelong thing for our entire family. But what was extremely interesting were kind of how events would unfold in the days after, and actually, and would unfold before his passing, how things just kind of fell into place. People we had, become friends with, situations that had happened. But we have dear friends whose oldest son is a year younger than Logan, but they were the best of friends. And he reaches out to us a couple days after the crash, and he's like, I did some digging on this guy, and he works for X, Y, and Z. And it shows that his primary job is doing X, Y, and Z. Basically, he was given the job to drive all over Florida to pick stuff and drop stuff off from local business sites. Interesting sidebar here is that Andriotis was on a business-only driver's license in, I think it's Ocala is where he was, where the office was. So he was driving back to Ocala actually when he hit us from picking something up from a business down in Tampa. But he was on a business-only driver's license, which means he was only supposed to be driving from his home to work and back, not all over the state of Florida, for business purposes. And so our friend Bill said, he may have been on the clock at the time. So we, through Bill, we had hired an attorney who starts to look into things and was able to retrieve his cell phone use because it was a business phone that he was on, and was able to receive cell phone data. And it would be through all of this information, Joe Patsko, was our attorney and friend. He worked so hard on all of this. And if it hadn't been for him in that moment, this criminal case would have been nothing, because it was because of the work that he did in the beginning. He sat with us in the state attorney's office, a year later, and we just sat there and pleaded the assistant state attorney to take this case. Apparently the Florida Highway Patrol had been in there as well, but because we had proof that he was on his phone, we were able to take this a year later after Logan's death into something, start getting it into the criminal arena. And it would be 6 months after we sat there and talked to Bill Cato, who was at the time the assistant state attorney. He would do the paperwork, he'd figure it all out, and he would file charges against Andriotis. That's what I was talking about earlier in the podcast. Yeah. Jordan and I being on the way to Tallahassee to testify in front of legislation. So, yeah.
And then they charged him and they arrested him.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
And that's how that works.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So next question. More as far as like the detail of the events and the crash, where when you realize you've been in a car accident, are there things that
or a car crash?
That's right, a car crash. I've been calling it a crash this whole time. I was doing
That's
so good.
That's all right. It's actually, I think it's natural for everybody to say accident because, especially since a child died in there. But that's me wanting to change the societal vernacular around
Yeah, you have
this.
to.
Mm-hmm.
You're absolutely correct. Mm-hmm. And it is, like you said, accident is when you can't prevent it. Nothing I could have done. It was raining.
Absolutely.
I hit the brakes. I hit the brakes on time, but the car skidded.
And if that would have been the case that day, this would not be a conversation we'd be having today.
Yeah. This was you did this, and this is something that happened. So the car crash, there might be people who either have been in the situation before, or if they unfortunately ever find themselves in the situation, what are some things that either from the moments leading right after, or preventable things that can happen, or any looking back, anything that you tell people now where you're like, hey, if you're in a car accident, car crash, or if something like this happens to you where you the messaging has been don't text and drive because you could kill someone, but if you get hit, what are some things that you would tell people listening? Hey, this is what you need to know. These are your rights. These are the things that you don't think about when something like this happens. Anything like that you could share?
Well, so here's the crux of the situation. While there are many states going to hands-free, which kudos to all of these states, the problem is that the resources aren't going into local law enforcement to actually enforce this. And phones can't just be confiscated like that at a crash. There is no law in place that says I can take your phone and do the forensics. That's why this to me is so important, because not only am I sitting here speaking and was the trial for Logan and for our family, but it is to create a platform for change, to recognize all of those other victims of distracted driving and their families that came before Logan, because Logan's not the first case, and he sure as hell is not the last case. So what can we do now to have this conversation to prevent not only things going forward or to create, stronger laws or much tougher laws at a national level, right? But also the funds and the ability to enforce this. So if there is a crash of such, it can maybe become commonplace for cell phone records to be, checked, or cell phones to be confiscated immediately. But that's just not happening now. So, in our, in the years since, we have had people who have reached out to us and said, this is what happened and nobody will do anything about it. We just lost a loved one in the same way. There's no, and what do we do? And my hands are tied because the only thing I can do is say, I am so sorry for your loss and I hear you. And, the best thing that you can do is go to the local law enforcement and see if there's anything that can be done. But like I said, it was just by the grace of Bill, who was curious enough to research Andriotis, that all of this unfolded for us. I never in a million years would have thought, let me look him up on LinkedIn and see who he is and see who he works for. And, and I will tell you, we started getting people reaching out to us from the get-go, attorneys reaching out to us saying, oh, you were in this car crash, we can help. But Jordan and I, obviously, we've never been in this type of situation before. We have no idea. The only thing we were super stoked to see were there was a GoFundMe page that people put up immediately, and people were doing meal trains for when we were at home and supporting us. And so many, my students, I had a superior student, God love her, named Kim. I'm hoping she listens to this, at some point. I'm sure she will. She loved Logan too, but she gathered materials and a group of people, and they moved us out of the house that we were living in, and, wonderful community support. But Jordan and I never would have thought to have hired an attorney. We didn't know what was going on, but, Bill in the get-go knew. And so we had yet that other angel in our life that would help us move toward where we are today.
And even like with this, even with people listening to this, or people who have found themselves in the situation or who might find themselves in the situation in the future, just even it's spreading this information alone could change someone's journey.
Absolutely.
And healing. And I can't believe that you can't just pull forensics on a cell phone after a car crash to prove or to just double check, because even that, like, even if you could, how do I say this? Part of the reason that people don't drink and drive, I mean, people still do, like you said, there's still going to be people who are going to be on their phone or distracted while driving. But part of the reason that you don't do it, one, is because it sucks really bad if you get caught drinking and driving, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you get, like, people know if you go home when you're even a little buzzed, if there's a cop nearby, you freak out because you know that it's DUI suck, right? Really bad, which shouldn't be the reason you don't drink and drive, but that's kind of what the law is helping prevent, right? Is there's a higher price to be paid for that, or a higher consequence to be paid for that action. The second reason people don't do that is because they know that they can also test you for drinking and driving. Do you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Which is there's a point I'm trying to make, is if people knew that if I get on my phone and I hit someone, I kill someone, or if I injured someone, they can take me to court and my phone will be confiscated. The records will be confiscated, and they can test and find out I was, in fact, using my phone, for example. Even if that was the law that you could totally do that in the event of a car crash, that alone would make people go, no, I shouldn't do this, because they have a way to prove that I was doing this, in the way that they have a way to prove that I was drunk when I was driving, or intoxicated. So even just that law alone would, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm sure there's a bunch of red tape and stuff.
Well, I mean, and there is, and there's, the problem is that it starts to infringe on people's, privacy and their rights for privacy. And until that becomes something, and I mean, that's really the long game in this, right? We have dear friends who are out fighting this in legislation every single day. And while we aren't active currently in that. That's what we did a lot with Living for Logan. We were constantly traveling. Of course, then I had a baby in 2019, and I kind of we were wondering how that was going to work, and then COVID happened, and so it just got to be too much for us. But we continue to support our friends who are out there, working with legislation and talking to schools and talking to people, and that is that's technically the long game for us all, is getting us to that national level where, how many people are going to have to die before someone gives a shit, and that's the thing. And Jordan and I found it, working in legislation for us became very tiring. Talking, doing so much media work became very tiring for me because, people love a story, but then 5 minutes later, they forget about you.
Yeah.
And, after the trial happened, I swore it was going to change the world quickly. The media was all over us. I swore, people were seeing us, all over the nation at different syndications. And, I was just like, Jordan, this is going to happen. And I kid you not, we sneezed. It's like the world forgot about it. This groundbreaking case. And, we got what we needed in the moment. And now it's done. And that's exactly why we are fighting this, because people give a shit for 2 seconds to get the story, to, lead the media or this and that and the other. And then they're like, okay, well, let's move on to the next thing. And doing that over and over and over again, and testifying in front of legislation just for it, for hands-free laws or better, laws, just to have it fall flat on its face. And then you walk home completely discouraged. I don't have it in me for that. I don't care how much work I've done. If I can be transparent, I've heard conversations. I've had conversations. These legislators don't want a law because they're doing it themselves, So, again, I'm projecting there. I can't prove that, but I've been around and heard enough to where that can be a thing too.
Yeah. It's inconvenient for everybody is a narrative of why it can't happen, right?
Right.
It's like, it's just so inconvenient. Well, what's inconvenient for a mother to lose her child? Let's just put it lightly.
Right. Well, listen to this. So,
how inconvenient for you, sir, that you had to put your phone down. Maybe my son would be alive.
Well, and you think certain people would learn, for example, Andreotis's father, who spoke in the sentencing hearing, that his business, he continues to do business from his car because he lives in his car. So his son kills a 9-year-old boy, changes the life of a family forever, just completely breaks everything down. Now, mind you, it did not break us apart. I have to put that out there.
Yeah.
It has not broken us apart, although we have fought like hell to stay a family.
And that we'll also discuss, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
All of this is going to be unpacked in future episodes, so keep listening.
Stay
hit that
tuned
subscribe
for
button.
the next...
Hit that follow, subscribe button.
Right.
And subscribe for our newsletter, which also is down below, so you can get... We're not going to message you merch or anything like that without your permission. All the newsletter is for is so that you know when a new episode drops, you can keep along with this story.
Right.
So sorry, go on. No. It didn't tear you apart, but
it broke a family to pieces, right?
Physically, mentally, and emotionally.
Absolutely. And then you've got
probably worse emotionally, because of
I don't know. Jordan and I still have issues physically. Although we have good, people in our camp. I will say that Nashville is an amazing place for all sorts of care. I'm so happy to be here. But that's another
great city.
It's an amazing city, but that's another episode, right? On why Brooke loves Nashville so much. Never thought I'd live in Tennessee, but now I'm like, you will never pry me from this house and from this place. Now, see, I put it out in the universe, so it's going to happen, but that's typically how it works. But yeah, so, his dad sits there during sentencing and is like, well, I use my phone in my truck because I work from my truck. And I'm like, you fucker, you're seriously sitting here telling us that, by the way, I have to put the disclaimer on. I'm sorry, Mom, for all the F-bombs. It's just going to happen. So
it's uncensored.
And we are uncensored. Listen, damn it. Yeah. So, and this is why my daughter's not going to be allowed to listen to my podcast, and both of them actually. But I mean, she's 13. She's hearing worse at school. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. If the father of the man who just got convicted for 30 years is going to sit there in the courtroom, or convicted of manslaughter or homicide, I'm sorry, and then sit in the courtroom and be like, you should let him go because I work on my phone in my car all the time. And it's like,
what is that even?
We'll
let you in this up. Kick him out of here. What is he doing?
Florida. But that's neither here nor there either.
Yeah.
Oh, the wonderful state of Florida.
Wow. Well, oh man. Alrighty. Well, that's The Crash, and this has been episode 1. Wow, there's so much more to unpack and so much more that we can venture into. By the way, if you made it this far, a couple of things to note. The next episode, not all episodes are going to be this traumatic.
No.
We specifically are going to have it denoted on the titles and on the descriptions that this is one where it's like, here's some trauma that happened, and then the next few episodes are a little bit about the aftermath and the healing part of this. So if you're more interested in that aspect of it and the graphics are a little too much for you, maybe catch the cliff notes in the next episode and skip those. But we are uncensored, and that was the whole purpose of this, is to just let it rip and let people understand, because nobody's talking about this. And part of healing through this stuff is to have conversations about it. So that's one thing too. If you're listening to this on the day it was released, you are actually listening to this on June 2nd, which is the day that would be Logan's 18th birthday. So happy birthday, Logan.
Happy birthday, Logan.
And if you're not listening to this, well, no, that's a little Easter egg that you now know about this, but this is the day that this podcast launched, and we specifically picked this date for that reason. So thank you for listening. If you like what you heard, please make sure you hit the follow, subscribe button wherever you're listening to this, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. And if you want to subscribe to see when more episodes are coming out, the link is below. That's all we ask, is just sign up for the newsletter. We're not going to spam you. It's just going to be, here's the new episode that dropped. And then on that note, I'm Andres Gamboa. Brooke, thank you for sharing this insane story.
Episode 1 in the books, man.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to more. I'm so excited.
Yes, me too.
Thank you for listening, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks,
Bye-bye,
everyone.
Everybody.